Welcome to this lesson concerning cells. Um, a cell is the smallest living thing in the human organism. Uh, and all living structures in the human body are made of cells, and all cells are made from other cells. So cells begot cells. There are hundreds of different types of cells in the human body. Each vary in shape, round, flat, long, thin, short, or thick, in size. A small granular cell, which is in the brain, the cerebellum, is only 4 micrometers in size. If you compare that to an oocyte, which is an egg in the female, which is 100 micrometers. There are 3 main parts, and we'll cover them through this lesson. The first part of the cell is the plasma membrane, often called the cell membrane, is a thin, flexible barrier that separates the inside of the cell from the environment outside of the cell and regulates what can pass in and out of the cell. Internally, the cell is divided into cytoplasm and a nucleosa. The nucleus is considered the most important organelle of the cell. It's where it gets its directions. The cell gets its guidance from the nucleus. It is separated from the cytoplasm of the cell by a nuclear envelope or membrane. It contains DNA genes that code for proteins necessary for the cell to function. Organelles of the cells are uh, tiny functioning organelles inside the cell individually, and one of them is the nucleosa, which we mentioned earlier. It has around the nucleosa a nuclear envelope that separates the contents of the nucleus from the contents of the cytoplasm. This nuclear envelope has nuclear pores in an envelope, which are small holes that control ions and molecules. For example, proteins and RNA can move in and out of the nucleus. In addition, DNA. The nucleus contains many nuclear proteins. Together, DNA and these proteins called chromatin, a region outside the nucleus called the nucleosa, is related to the production of RNA molecules needed to transport and expose the information coded in DNA. So what in essence is this, is you often wonder, how do we get insulin in our body? This is the nucleosis of the cell that allows RNA to go out, messenger RNA, and it codes for the insulin, which is secreted by the cell. That's just one example of the pancreas cells, pancreatic cells. So you can see it's pretty functional, and it's pretty extraordinary, and considering how small they are and how important they are for the body. Functions of the organelles of the cell. One of the ones they first bring up is the nucleosa, which basically is a storage area for the RNA. Ribosomes have 2 main functions: decoding the message and the formation of peptide bonds. These 2 activities reside in 2 large ribonucleoprotein molecules of unequal size. The ribosomal subunits, each subunit is made of 1 or more ribosomal RNAs, and many ribosomal RNAs will be able to code for various proteins that the cell will secrete out into the body. Here we have functions of some of the organelles that are in the cell. Cytoplasm is a cyto meaning cell and plasma meaning something molded, is where most functions of the cell are carried out. It looks a bit like mixed fruit jelly, where the watery jelly is called the cytosol, and the different fruits in it are called organelles. The cytosol also contains many molecules and ions involved in cell functions. Different organelles also perform different cell functions. Many are also separated by the cytosol by membranes. The largest organelle, which we discussed earlier, was the nucleus, and is separated from the cytosol, or the cytoplasma, by a nuclear envelope, the membrane. and it contains the DNA. Generally speaking, the inside environment of a cell is called the intracellular fluid. Intra, within, and referral to all fluid contained in the cytosol. Organelles and nucleus, while the environment outside a cell is called the extracellular fluid. Extra is outside and refer to all fluid outside of the cells. It's good to note that plasma, the fluid part of the blood, is the only extracellular fluid compartment that links all cells in the body. Then we come to cytosol. This is function of it is to mitosis, and deeply involved in the division of cells. But with it, cytosomes also can be dysfunctional and may promote cancer by increasing the levels of chromosomal instability and metastatic potential of the cancer cells. Hundreds of proteins are concentrated on the cytosomes, which indicates that it has other functions besides mitosis. It includes the cell cycle regulators, checkpoint proteins, and signaling molecules. Raise the question of whether cytosomes are essential for many cell processes. It's important to understand that we're just beginning to understand each of the organelles in the cell a little better as each year passes. So we're continually learning new material and just how remarkable and how amazing the living cell is. On this slide, we have the endoplasmic reticulum and the mitochondria. The definitions of their functions are pretty well stated on the slide, but I would like to bring up the relationship these two have. They're very unique. The mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum are essential organelles in the eukaryotic cells. And what is a eukaryotic cell is you and I are eukaryotic cells, for example. We're not singular, we're multicellular, so we're eukaryote, which play key roles in various biological pathways. Mitochondria are responsible for adenosine triphosphate. As you can see, it's used for energy in the source of the body. But it also maintains our calcium homeostasis and regulation of apoptosia, which is the cellular death. While the endoplasmic reticulum is involved in protein folding, lipid metabolism, as well as calcium homeostasis. These organelles have their own functions, but they also communicate via the mitochondria associated endoplasmic reticulum membrane. So they basically are able to communicate across that membrane to provide another level of regulation in energy production. So the lipid process of calcium buffering and apoptosia, which is cellular death, hence defects in any of these alter cell survival and death. Here is a point to make, is that endoplasmic reticulum, if it meets functions, most likely the mitochondria will soon follow suit and cellular death will occur prematurely. Whether this is a regulation of the actual lifespan of a cell is being studied, but I thought that it was interesting to note that the two work together, especially when it comes to calcium buffering and cellular death. As discussed earlier, inside the cell can be very complex, and there are numerous organelles and floating ribosomes and various types of ingested enzymes and things like that just floating around the cytosol within the cell. Now, what we have here is that to understand we have lysosomes. They hold enzymes that are created by the cell, and the purpose of these lysosomes is to digest things or intruders that enter the cell. They may be used to digest food or break down the cell when it dies. What this means is that a lysosome can be a a real hazard to the cell overall if it's not packaged properly. And therefore, here comes the Golgi apparatus. It packs the suitcases and allows the lysosome to travel around the cell. Um, it packages up and pinches off a small, very specific vesicule, is what we call it, and becomes a floating round ball inside the cell. And these are the two relationships between these two. Here we have peroxisomes. It's a vesicule, round circle thing. When we talked about the Golgi apparatus package up lysosomes, they also do it for peroxisomes. Um, it's a fraction of a micrometer in diameter. It's a very small thing. It's containing fluid or solute being ingested into the cell by the endocytosis. So as a cell takes in nutrients, it packages it up, and the peroxisomes act as an enzyme to help digest those ingredients and fats, and then it's able to distribute them through nutrition. We have the cytoskeleton, an internal network that supports transport of intracellular components and helps maintain the cell's shape. Um, Another thing, you have the cieli and the flagella, which are motility structures that allow cells to single cellular or multicellular organisms to transport themselves in a fluid environment. It's a rigid spiral flagella is composed of a flagellin, and they have a rigid spiral flagella composed of our arterial flagellins as well, which is similar to our hair. It's created and makes the cell mobile. Then you have the pinocyte vessels. It's a provided mechanism for it's a large molecule in solution that can enter the cell. Um, it allows the cell to drink in fluids. On this slide, we're dealing with replication of cells. As you'll notice, there are two primary replications. So one of them is a meiosis, which is done by sex, and it has a gamete, and it actually is a replication of the entire organism eventually, as it multiplies and becomes, let's say, another baby human. And so it's quite different than mitosis. Mitosis is asexual. I mean, not asexual. It's not sexual at all, and it only replicates the individual cell, like the liver cell or the cardiac cell or the skin epidermis. It only does that. Now, we're familiar with the fact that the fertilization, an egg and sperm, and the zygote is once the cell has been fertilized, and then it has its full set of 46 chromosomes, um, 23 chromosomes from each parent equaling to 46, and eventually it will become a human. Now, this is true. The number of these chromosomes are different in different species. So, but still, a zygote is a fertilized egg. This concludes the lesson. Um, I want you to be aware that there are numerous reference materials available to you. One is would be your primary instructor. You can get specific tutoring and specific understanding about the subject matter directly from your primary. The way you contact your primary is through Blackboard. There's a prompt which says faculty availability. You just click on that, and the office hours are right there and contact information of your primary instructor. Then there's the Cengage website. It's a computer-based website that has the book embedded into it, in which you can search through its search engine for various keywords, and text will appear and page numbers that relate to that material will be very helpful as well. One of the most helpful things that many of the students need to be very aware of is that UMA has an extensive online library, which has texts, journals, books, and videos. Um, they're all available to you, and it is a great resource. And I hope that you will make a habit of using that resource material. It's been an excellent time and a great time to be a part of this lesson and I'm wishing you guys the best in your academics. Best wishes.